thank you so much for joining us. Guys, we're really fortunate to have a very special guest with us today, someone who has made a really significant impact on the tinnitus community worldwide. So I'm delighted to introduce Glenn Schweitzer, who is the founder of Rewiring Tinnitus. Glenn's journey with tinnitus is not just a story of personal triumph, but also kind of a testament to the dedication of helping others navigate the condition, navigate their own paths to successful habituation. So Glenn's transformed his personal struggle with tinnitus into a resource that's helped so many people. And he's got some really innovative techniques for habituation that have been recognized internationally and have brought relief to many around the world. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. Where in the world are you joining from?
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here, Ed. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I am joining you from South Florida. I'm in a town called Boynton Beach, Florida, about halfway between Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach, and where it's quite hot this time of year.
I can imagine. I can imagine it's probably quite a lot warmer than London. So if you are joining, my name's Dr. Edmund Farrer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Otto. So we build digital programs that help people manage tinnitus. And today we're going to have a really unique opportunity to learn directly from Glenn. So Glenn's going to share his journey, his insights, and techniques with us. And you guys are going to get the opportunity to answer questions directly. So this is a really rare chance to gain personalized advice from a leading figure in the tinnitus community. So guys, I'm sure you've all got lots of questions for Glenn. This is your opportunity. Please ask them in the Q&A functionality of Zoom. So at the bottom, there's a little button that says Q&A, and we will do our best to get around to them. We'll get around to them kind of first come, first served. So if you have questions, start writing them now. We'll get around to them in the Q&A section. I'm also really excited, guys, to share with you a new tinnitus management package that we've put together at Otto, which I'm going to talk to you guys about at the end. But before we get onto that, Glenn, I'd love for you to share your tinnitus journey with us. Tell us about your experience with tinnitus.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So early on, well, I've had tinnitus for about as long as I can remember. But when I was young, I didn't even know that it wasn't normal. I thought everybody could hear the high-pitched tone that I could hear when it was silent. And I really never thought twice about it. It wasn't until later in life, probably my early teens, probably like 13, when I started going to parties and concerts, that it first started to become a problem. After every loud event I ever went to, I would get like this intense stuffiness in my ears, louder tinnitus, some temporary hearing loss. I would have trouble sleeping, and then it would all slowly return to normal over a day or two. And it would always bother me, but it never lasted long at all. And so I never really worried about it for very long either. But everything changed when I was 24 and diagnosed with Meniere's disease, which is a somewhat rare and incurable inner ear balance disorder that's characterized by having these attacks of violent, like rotational vertigo, where the room just starts to spin. It's completely terrifying. You don't know what's happening to you or why it's happening. It just completely incapacitates you. And it causes like really intense fullness in the ears, fluctuating hearing loss, loud tinnitus, and many secondary symptoms like fatigue and brain fog, all of which I was experiencing quite a lot at the time. And so it wasn't until Meniere's disease entered my life that my tinnitus volume permanently became much louder, and at the time, much more intense and intrusive. So early on, not a huge struggle, but like when I turned 24, that's when things started to sort of take a turn for the worse. And do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, please, definitely.
Okay, yeah. So in the early days of the Meniere's diagnosis, there was this period of like 6 to 9 months where my symptoms were at their worst, but my tinnitus was actually the least of my concerns. It was really loud and bothersome, but it was nowhere near as scary or bothersome as like the vertigo attacks and all these other symptoms, at least at first. It wasn't until I was able to start better managing all the other and more debilitating symptoms that my tinnitus started to become more and more of a problem and take up more of my focus. It was like the one thing that I couldn't improve. Everything else was improving except for my tinnitus. And it was just starting to drive me completely crazy at that point. I became more and more agitated by the sound. I started to obsess about it. I was like researching for hours and hours online every day, as much as I could, which only made things worse, as I'm sure many of you listening can know what that's like. And my anxiety just kept increasing and increasing. And in the middle of all this, so it really made my life quite difficult at the time. And while this was happening, I also lost my ability to meditate, which was one of my most important coping tools with Meniere's. I'd been meditating for years and years prior to Meniere's disease. It was one of the few things that actually helped to calm my stress and anxiety, helped me to cope with my symptoms. It was such an important thing in my life. And I would lay down to meditate, and I would focus into my breath, and the tinnitus was just screaming in my ears. And it basically made it impossible. And I nearly gave up. Interestingly, though, it sort of led to what has become my biggest breakthrough. I was sort of lying there in bed one night, just struggling to meditate again, when I had this like crazy idea hit me, where I had been fighting so hard to just ignore the sound of my tinnitus, and just focus on my breath. And I was failing. Like I would try to push it away, and I couldn't. And I just suddenly thought, like, what if I just stopped fighting to ignore the sound and just focus on the sound instead of my breath? And so it was this crazy, like scary idea that hit me, but I decided to do it. And I kind of focused into the sound, and I started to meditate. And for the first time in months, I was able to just fully relax back into a meditative state. And when it was over, my tinnitus just wasn't bothering me as much as it had been before I started. And it lasted only for a little while, but it was my first like real moment of hope. Nothing else had made even remotely that much of an impact, and it changed everything. And I just kept doing it, and I didn't over time. It ultimately, I now know that I habituated, but at the time I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that it wasn't bothering me. I was getting better, and I just kept doing it. And that was sort of like the founding idea behind all the work that came next. And the moment where everything finally started changing for the better.
Yeah, and that sounds like a really powerful moment that kind of inspired what happened next, and what began the kind of this long career you've had with helping others with tinnitus. And I'd also say as well that although Meniere's isn't that common, I suppose the experience you had in general with tinnitus is common, where you've had tinnitus for as long as you can remember. Same with me. You've had tinnitus for as long as you can remember, and then one day it just gets really bad, or over a period of days or weeks, it gets really bad. And you start thinking, God, I can't actually cope with this anymore. Like, I didn't realize.
I didn't know how I was going to live like that.
Exactly. And the same thing happened with me. I had it for many years. It got worse over a few days, and I thought, God, I hope this gets better. And it didn't. And I thought, how can I live? And I'm sure many people here listening will have had the same experience.
Totally.
So, so that it's kind of really led me on to the next question, actually, not quite nicely. Just tell us about your approach. Well, in fact, before I ask that, could you kind of explain what your understanding of habituation is, what your kind of approach to habituation is, and how that works?
Yeah. So, yes, maybe I'll start with my approach, and I'll kind of touch on some different things. But so my approach to habituation has three primary parts. There are, the most important of which are daily habituation exercises that take the form of these sort of tinnitus focused meditation techniques that I had discovered, although it's evolved quite a lot since those early days. And I've created quite a lot of ways to make that a lot easier and less scary than it sounds. I'm sure many of you listening hear me talk about focusing on the sound, and it's like a very scary, terrifying idea. But at the center of the strategy are the meditation techniques. And then part two would be you want to implement like as comprehensive of a toolkit as possible to reduce stress, calm the nervous system, and improve tinnitus coping as much as possible in the short term. And then also something that's become very important to me is the idea of a long-term strategy to prevent what is, I guess I call, or is known as habituation relapse and tinnitus related problems down the road. So I'll sort of kind of go through it one by one. So at the center of everything are these tinnitus focused meditation techniques, and they're designed to try to help change a person's underlying emotional, psychological, and even physiological response to the sound over time. So rather than incorporating the sound of a person's tinnitus into mindfulness meditation, which I know can be very helpful for a lot of people, I teach this very simple kind of concentration meditation, or it's also known as object-oriented meditation, where you just focus on the sound of the tinnitus instead of the breath or a mantra or anything else you might choose to focus on. And so because meditation, or rather this type of meditation, is so calming and relaxing when you get good at it and practice it often, and because you can focus on anything when you meditate, ultimately there's really nothing magical or special about the breath or a mantra or a part of the body or anything else you might want to focus on. By focusing on the sound of your tinnitus, but still achieving the meditative state of calm and relaxation, you're giving your brain and nervous system this new and emotionally positive experience to start to associate with the sound of the tinnitus. Now, the approach works it starts to work somewhat quickly for most people, but like all habituation strategies, it does take time. And so part two of the strategy then is to teach as many, or rather, if you're suffering, to learn as many coping tools, strategies, tools, and techniques to start to cope better in the short term. Early on, there's a heavy emphasis on calming the nervous system, reducing anxiety, trying to just help a person to relax as much as possible. And then also introduce all kind of tools to help deal with all of the many challenges and challenging moments that will arise over the course of the process of habituation. And then the third part of the strategy is this idea of the long-term strategy. And the bottom line is that life happens. You never know if you're going to get hit with a sound or an injury or like an illness that causes your tinnitus to change down the road after you've done all this hard work to habituate. And if you aren't prepared to manage a moment like that, you can quickly find yourself right back into the vicious cycle. And it can feel like the whole problem is just starting all over again. And so I've spent especially more recently over the last couple of years, I've shifted focus to put more emphasis here, but I've created all kinds of strategies to prevent that from happening. Like there's all sorts of trainings and kind of strategies you can implement to protect yourself if something were to happen that causes a spike or an issue down the road. And so that's become sort of a big part of my work. But the bottom line is that there may not be a cure for tinnitus, but I truly believe that every person has the capacity to habituate to some extent, and or at the very least to dramatically improve their quality of life with tinnitus.
That's really great to hear, because I'm sure many people will have had experiences with their doctors or healthcare professionals where they just said, sorry, you've just got to learn to live with it, and they kind of shrug their shoulders. So it's really positive to hear that from someone like you. You know, I'm sure lots of people found that inspirational, that it is possible to habituate. And what does it feel like when you have habituated?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It never actually feels like you're doing anything. It's not a conscious action you're taking. It just feels like being distracted. Like every tinnitus sufferer, even when it's very bad, like everyone gets brief moments of distraction, if not longer periods, when you're very engaged with some activity. And when you're completely distracted, you're not thinking about it, you're not hearing it, you're not focused on it. It's almost like it ceases to exist in your awareness in that moment, right? Now, it doesn't actually go away, but everybody has that moment. When you habituate, it just feels like that effortlessly all the time. Now, that doesn't mean you can't notice it. It's always there, at least with my tinnitus, which remains loud. It's still there to be noticed, but noticing my tinnitus in absence of any kind of emotional response or anxiety or any sort of stress is like hearing the sound of my heater or my air conditioning turn on when I'm trying to watch TV. Like I'll notice it, and then I just go back to whatever I was doing because nothing happened that hijacked my attention or requires, makes my nervous system think I'm under threat. And if I'm having a spike and that does start to happen, I have all kinds of techniques that I use in myself where I can catch it very quickly and kind of short circuit the emotional response and anxiety building very quickly. And then, like a matter of minutes, and then kind of get back to my day, usually without incident. But feeling like habituation just feels like you're living your life normally. It doesn't actually feel like anything special. It doesn't feel like you've accepted it or you're doing anything. It just feels like normal life.
Yeah, that really resonates. I suppose it almost feels like life before tinnitus, right? It feels like life before your tinnitus came along and started having an impact. And something else you said there was really interesting. about, and I have the same, by the way. So if I stop talking briefly, I can hear my tinnitus. It's still there, but I can come back to talking, and it doesn't, like, it's not bothering me. It's not making me feel the way it did when I first had it. And so I suppose it's about changing your brain's reaction using these kind of meditative techniques, and then the kind of the short-term tools and techniques, and the long-term strategy that you mentioned. It's all about changing how our brain reacts to tinnitus, so that A, we stop noticing it, and B, if we do notice it, doesn't make us feel anxious or angry or hopeless like it did in the beginning.
Exactly. I often say the promise of habituation is that you can restore your quality of life to pre-tinnitus levels, even if it doesn't go away. Like, so the goal is to remove any sort of mitigating impact that the tinnitus has on your quality of life. And I've certainly been successful in doing that. Like you and like many people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Glenn, tell me about the science. Can you kind of tell us about the science behind these techniques and why they work?
Sure. So I'm not a researcher or a scientist or even really a medical professional for that matter. What I do, I consider it like peer support and tinnitus focused health coaching. But I can tell you and explain why I believe that my meditation techniques are so effective for so many people. So most people, like, instinctively are just trying to ignore the sound of their tinnitus as much as they can. But if you're just trying to stay as busy as possible to be distracted while drowning it out with background noise and just trying to calm down when you're starting to feel stressed or anxious about it, on a very deep level, you're just fundamentally avoiding the problem. And problems always get worse when we avoid them. This is true of every kind of problem: emotional problems, psychological problems, physical problems. Tinnitus is no exception. But with the tinnitus focused meditation techniques that I teach, when you're able to get into a deeply relaxing meditative state while focused on the sound of the tinnitus, you're giving your brain and nervous system this completely new but like emotionally positive experience that it can start to connect with the sound of the tinnitus. And I always say it's this experience that you can't really have naturally. There's only two natural experiences of tinnitus that anyone can have, generally speaking. There's the experience of being distracted, where you're not thinking about it and not really hearing it for some brief period of time. And then there's the experience of hearing it and experiencing some kind of negative emotional response. At best, if you've habituated naturally or maybe done other means of habituation, you may hear it and have no emotional response. And that's ideal. But there's no natural scenario where you hear it and experience anything even remotely close to what people would consider a positive emotional state. But the meditation techniques create that experience directly. And so this not only helps to reduce the intensity of these underlying negative emotional, behavioral, and psychological patterns that are preventing habituation from occurring naturally. And of course, this is the goal of all habituation strategies. But when it comes to neuroplasticity, I believe there's something incredibly powerful about using positive reinforcement as well, and having this emotionally positive experience directly related to and coming, that the tinnitus facilitated enables that to occur. Interestingly, I've come up with some other techniques. It's not necessarily even just meditation. Like, having any kind of relaxation practice that incorporates tinnitus can be effective in this kind of way. Although I do believe that my meditation techniques sort of kind of cut to the heart of the matter pretty directly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I suppose, like, if you look at what the research shows, there is evidence to show that relaxation techniques, meditation, these things do help in habituation. These things do help to change how our brain reacts. And I suppose, like, we know that stress, the stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, we know that these things actually make the perception of tinnitus louder. So if we can reduce these in time, our perception of tinnitus will change as well. So tinnitus won't seem as loud. Okay, so Glenn, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go on to the audience Q&A. So if you guys have a question for Glenn, thank you for those that have submitted them already, but keep them coming, guys. We're going to try and get through as many of them as possible. So Glenn, what advice would you have for someone that is just getting started with their journey towards habituation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I'm talking to any new patient, I always start with just one simple truth. And we've sort of covered this, but it's, if you have tinnitus and it's negatively affecting your quality of life in any way, there's hope. Despite anything you read online, despite what your doctor may have said, through habituation, you can find complete and lasting relief from your tinnitus, even if it never goes away or reduces or changes in volume or sound. Unfortunately, though, that's not what most people hear when they're starting this journey. Most people are starting from a place of feeling completely powerless, afraid. Their doctors will say things like, oh, like you mentioned before, like so many doctors all over the world will incorrectly say there's nothing you can do about tinnitus, you just have to live with it. And that's kind of infuriating, especially considering that tinnitus retraining therapy has been around for more than 30 years. And the fact that every ENT doesn't know that is kind of heartbreaking, let alone anything else that's been developed in the last 30 years. But okay, so starting from a place of hope is very important. Really, though, the first step that any new tinnitus patient should take is always to seek out medical treatment, because there's many causes of tinnitus that have treatable underlying medical conditions that can sometimes lead to potentially even your tinnitus resolving, or even more commonly just improvement in your tinnitus. But even if there's nothing that can be done, it's still an important first step. Like, you want to rule out any possible medical treatments that can help. So once you do that, the next step is to try to find a positive, hopeful source of information to learn more about tinnitus, and more specifically to learn about habituation. And there's a lot of people doing great work in this space now. But ultimately you want to find a strategy that makes sense for you, and then commit to a strategy, and then avoid internet research after that. Like, people gravitate towards the message boards and the Facebook groups, but the problem is that it becomes, the people that get better aren't usually the ones that go on the message boards and talk about it. It's biased towards the negative, because it's all the people who are struggling, whose doctors also told them there's nothing they can do, who are also feeling powerless. So you want to find a strategy that for habituation that makes sense to you, and then commit. And then finally, in the short term, just to give just a sense of like something people can do to start improving quality of life early on, or at least to better cope with difficult moments. Like, generally, you want to, just to make it very broad, you want to do, distraction is helpful. Like, once you have a habituation strategy in place, you want to try to distract yourself however you can. You also want to try to relax in as many ways as possible, both mentally or physically. And there's all kinds of tools. We can certainly talk about them later on, but just in terms of relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, reducing anxiety, reframing negative thoughts, changing behaviors. And then also to incorporate, if your level of hearing allows, sound therapy and sound masking to help you cope. Whether you're doing tinnitus retraining therapy or not, background noise can be a very simple way to take the edge off and reduce your suffering. And everything else requires effort. Masking doesn't really. Just press play, right? And you don't even need fancy hearing aids or anything just to get benefit. Like any speaker, your phone speaker, headphones, Bluetooth speaker, just find a variety of different sounds that help you to cope, and just keep them on rotation early on. As long as you can still hear your tinnitus through the masking, you're generally helping yourself to habituate. And if you end up doing a more specific protocol like tinnitus retraining therapy, there's going to be, more specific masking strategies there. But that's just kind of a few early stage things that I often talk about when new patients are reaching out to me.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome, Glenn. There's so much useful information there. So guys, if you wanted to listen to that back, we will be recording this webinar. So there's loads and loads of useful pieces of information in there, Glenn. So we're going to go on to the Q&A. So we've got a lot of questions to get through, Glenn. So if possible, try to keep the answers short, and then we can get through as many through as many answers. All right. Although I know it can be difficult. So question from Bija: I'm constantly tired. Do you think the brain having to deal with tinnitus tires it out?
Yeah, yes, but also it's an exhausting problem. Like, it is emotionally, psychologically, and physiologically draining. Like, anything that's going to put you into a chronic state of stress is going to be extremely exhausting to deal with. It takes up so much time and energy. So while yes, there's elements to it that are just inherently like cause fatigue and feeling tired, it is an exhausting problem, and that improves, and you'll have a lot more energy as you make progress and work to habituate. But this is so common. Pretty much everybody deals with some version of that, where it's just exhausting. It's a marathon early on. It takes a lot of work, and you got to do the work to habituate and get better. And then it gets easier. But yeah, that's extremely common in so many different ways, and something that's very true.
Great. So question here from Chef. So I'm lucky. and I do forget about my tinnitus around 70% of the day. So it sounds like you've made some great progress with habituation. So well done so far. And unfortunately, he's saying it's still, he or she is still saying it's still a 7 to 8 out of 10 in loudness. So the question is, should it lower to fully accept? So will it
okay.
Once you fully accepted it, will the volume change? I think is what they're asking.
Okay. So let me answer the question that you said first, which wasn't correct, and then I'll answer their question. So does the volume, first of all, does not need to lower to reach habituation. Like I've seen too many people recover from just the absolute most life-ruining levels of tinnitus imaginable to ever believe that it's not possible for anyone. I mean, I've worked with patients where almost no hearing left in one ear, very little in the other ear, just enough to sort of communicate with captions, but masking is not an option, multiple fluctuating loud tones and sounds every day. And it's hard to wrap your head around how it could be possible, how you could change the response to such a scenario, but you can. It doesn't matter ultimately. I personally believe what it sounds like. Now, to answer the second part of the question, there's kind of two metrics of volume. There's actual objective volume, and that certainly can change for a variety of reasons. It can get actually louder or actually quieter, but even if it doesn't change, like subjective perceived volume can change wildly depending on emotional state, how rested you are, how much other stressful things that are going on in your life. You can have a moment where you're having a spike and you're panicking and anxious and it just all consuming, piercingly loud, and then you do something to relax very deeply and it will often seem quieter and less intrusive and intense. Intense is perhaps a better word, but even if it doesn't actually change in volume. So the answer is yes. Most people do experience, at the very least, like a subjective lowering of intensity and possibly perceived volume as well as they make progress with habituation. Like that's certainly true for me. Like my tinnitus is loud, but it doesn't feel loud. I'm not noticing it 99% of the day.
Yeah, mine's the same. It's so subjective, isn't it? And it's so dependent on other things that are going on. Are you having a stressful day? Are you in a quiet room? Is there other noises?
How much did you sleep last night? Really all of it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. They've just very quickly, they've done research into this, and they found that people that have if they ask people to report subjective volume at times, it really isn't consistent, and it is very much dependent on other things that are going on.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's lots. So there's a question here from Julie. Julie's had tinnitus in her left ear for 5 years and has mostly habituated. Really pleased to hear, Julie. But the last kind of few months, she's kind of had this fluttering and spasm type feeling, which is a feeling more than a sound.
Yep.
Is this something that you could habituate to as well? Like these sometimes people get might be sensitivity to sound, might be unusual feelings or sensations in the ear. Can you habituate to these as well?
Yeah. Great question. So first things first, what she's describing is almost certainly what is known as tensor tympani syndrome or mid-ear myclonus. And it is really like sort of a muscle spasm thing happening in the middle ear or even inner ear or some part of the ear. This is something I've experienced as well. Like for me, when it doesn't happen all the time, it happens in periods of intense stress where it almost feels like a little fluttering or jet of air is like hitting my eardrum from the inside, sometimes intermittently, sometimes like in a consistent way. A couple things. So one, you absolutely can, if it is a constant thing going on, you absolutely can habituate to that. But also, there in some cases, like this can lead to something that's known as typewriter tinnitus, and there's drugs that have been shown to be effective. I'm not a doctor, but I know there's research to suggest this drug called carbamazepine can be sometimes helpful with mid-ear myclonus. And then also just working to reduce facial tension, jaw tension, like neck tension. Sometimes that can help as well. Like focusing on like physical relaxation techniques, body scan. Sometimes that can lead to improvements as well. But you absolutely can habituate if it doesn't stop. That's 100% true.
Great. And I suppose that kind of leads on to, there's some questions about my tinnitus is X. I have this type of tinnitus. My tinnitus changes. Yes. Does the process of habituation change depending on the type of tinnitus, or is it
That's a good question. Well, yeah, great question. So I think we surveyed everybody on Earth, like we'd find some consensus of like if we played all the common tinnitus sounds to every human being on Earth, like we'd get some consensus of like which sounds are more annoying, which sounds are less annoying. But I'll get two people with the same two sounds, and let's say I'm making this up, but a low pitch sound and a high pitch sound, and they both experience this, and they'll tell me the opposite stories. Like one person, oh, the low pitch, you don't understand, nobody can live with that. It's like a bass tone piercing through everything, and then the other person says the opposite about the high pitch sound, right? And what it illustrated to me early on, I got it pretty quick, is like it doesn't really matter what it sounds like. Now, there are some types of tinnitus that can take a little bit longer to habituate for some people. So the more it fluctuates, the longer potentially it may take, because it's a little bit of like trying to hit a moving target. Intermittent tinnitus falls into this category. A lot of people have tinnitus where it's there one day and maybe the next day it's a different volume, and the next day it's gone, and the next day it's back. Sometimes it's a cyclical pattern, sometimes it's random. I'll get people where it's sounds are always there, always intense, but they're fluctuating and changing day to day. And it's hard to wrap your head around, like, well, if it's changing so much, like how can I possibly get used to that? But ultimately, in those cases, you're just working to, there's additional emotional hurdles and challenges that come into play, there's different techniques that can be used to resolve it. Things like expectations come into play. It makes you, if you have a kind of tinnitus where you get days off, it makes you feel like it needs to be gone for you to be happy, because you are happy on those days. So there's challenges that come into play. But at least in the protocol that I teach, I have not found, other than having to add a few additional kind of educational components and introducing a few additional strategies, the basic strategy with meditation seems to be the same. It's just you are calming, you're inducing a state of calm in relation to the sounds that you're experiencing, regardless of what they are that day, regardless of how they're changing. And often what I find, and I'll wrap up with this, is if I'm working with somebody who has a lot of fluctuations, like I had a client recently where it was changing every day, like 4 to 5 sounds different every day. But as they made progress, with habituation, it kind of started to stabilize a bit. Like the pattern always starts to change for the better. There's still fluctuation there, but it's not quite the dramatic, constantly intrusive, intense changes they were experiencing before. And that's something I see very frequently in cases of intermittent and fluctuating tinnitus, where the pattern just starts to change for the better as the emotional response improves.
Yeah, I very much suspect that the emotional response and the pattern and the change of the tinnitus are very much interlinked. So there's a question here from Bonnie. She's had tinnitus for 8 years, hasn't habituated to the point where they think they should, and it's still bothering them. What can they consistently do to improve the response on the louder days?
Okay, so it's a long answer, but I'll try to make it short. First, most people will habituate naturally, just doing nothing to some extent, given potentially a very long period of time. But I would argue that you can get to a much, much greater level of habituation by deliberately working to habituate. So my answer to that question is going to be different than other people kind of teaching other or similar strategies. But just to make it simple, oh God, there's so many things that are coming to mind. But just backing up to what I said before, having some sort of daily relaxation practice that incorporates the sound of your tinnitus, whether that's experimenting with the sort of meditation techniques that I've been talking about today, whether that's a mindfulness practice where you're opening up awareness and just sort of observing everything arising in consciousness, including the tinnitus, whether you're doing some sort of body scan or structured breathing exercise that incorporates some tinnitus focus, having some sort of daily relaxation practice to achieve a greater level of habituation can be very helpful. But also there's this sort of thing I call speed to tools. You want to work to improve speed to tools, which is sort of the term I give it's first being able to recognize when you're starting to react negatively to the tinnitus, when you're starting to have anxiety. It's not an immediate 0 to 100% escalation. Often there's a buildup there, learning to catch yourself closer to the moment that reaction is starting, and then intervening with a coping action and technique right away. It's hard to think your way out of those moments. You'll get much better success if you do something, take some step, take some coping action to calm that reaction down as quickly as possible. So practicing coping in this way, like learning to recognize when you're starting to react, and then practicing using your tools as quickly as possible. And then also using those tools for as long as you need to. People often feel like to go back to tools they don't need as much feels like they're failing or going backwards, and it shouldn't be like that. Like if you have tools that help you, use them when you need them. And that's sort of like a kind of one of the principles in my long-term strategy is like you want to get back to the tools as quickly as possible and use them exhaustively until the need is gone. And that's sort of how you can protect yourself. So those two things I think will be most helpful in those cases. And for anyone who has made some progress with habituation and would like to go further.
Yeah, and it's very much a case of work out what works for you and then keep coming back to those when you need to use them again.
Exactly.
It's something we teach in the SFAP as well. So, Glenn, I'm going to try and do some quick fire questions now. So if you can, I'll do my best fast, just conscious of time, guys. So, Tom, really good question here. Do you think that focusing on the sound helps to ease the fear factor, kind of like facing your fears?
I definitely do. And you don't have to face it in silence. You can incorporate masking and other relaxation techniques as well. But that is at the core of everything that I teach. Yes.
Yeah. A question from Mark. So Mark's kind of saying here that focusing on tinnitus during meditation is counterintuitive based on advice he's had so far. Much. And I think some of what we teach in the Otto app is different to that. So his focus to date has been his attempting to ignore the sound, not focus on, and therefore nullify the emotional response. Has he got this wrong, or is this just a different approach?
No, not necessarily. Like, no, I don't believe meditation is the only way. I'm certainly not suggesting that here today. It's just the strategy that's been most effective for me and the one that I've sort of built a system around, and I've seen it work for a lot of people. But like tinnitus retraining, you want to have some sort of strategy to address the issues you're facing. Like if you're ignoring it and it's failing and you're still reacting and you're just trying to sit with it, like you're reinforcing the negative pattern in some way. So you want to try to change the underlying pattern, but there's many ways to do that. Like with tinnitus retraining therapy, they'll use masking. You're just reducing the perceived volume with sound, and it makes it less, you're not confronting it directly, but you're not pushing it away entirely. And that allows you to sort of lower the emotional response. But there's just giving a little information. No, I don't think he's doing anything wrong necessarily.
Sure. Thank you. And just to clarify, there are different approaches. Some approach will work for some, other people work for others.
Exactly. Yes. 100%.
So guys, I'm aware there's lots of questions that I haven't got to yet. I'm going to do my best to get through them. We might run over a few minutes. But
I'm happy to answer as many questions as people have time for. So keep them firing. I'll try to answer as fast as possible.
We've got a really interesting discussion here, so I think we should continue. So another quick fire one. Can you go to loud environments like weddings after you've habituated?
Great question. Yes, you absolutely can. However, you need to protect yourself. Everybody needs to protect themselves, but from loud sounds. And most live events are too loud, way louder than they should be, loud enough to damage everybody's hearing. If you have tinnitus already, you are at greater risk. We should all be protecting ourselves. The best thing you can do is get yourself a set of musicians earplugs or high fidelity earplugs. You can get a custom molded set from your audiologist or just an off-the-shelf variety if you search for musicians earplugs on Amazon. Lowers the volume but maintains clarity. Like, regular foam earplugs will sort of distort things. But as long as you protect yourself, there's no reason to think you need to avoid any environment or scenario.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Next question. So thoughts on sound therapy?
Yeah. So for me, in my program, sound therapy is not like the engine of the car on the road to habituation. Meditation is. I think of it as a coping tool and a powerful one. For me, it's the lowest hanging fruit on the coping tool tree. Like I said before, it takes no effort to just turn some sounds on. In my opinion, like it's great to, I always recommend finding a handful of sounds that do it for you and just keep them on rotation. It's not a forever thing, but if it helps to alleviate discomfort early on, it'll help you to habituate faster and get to the point where you no longer need masking. So I am a huge proponent of sound therapy. And many audiologists will focus on like white noise, violet noise, pink noise, broadband. But in my program, I just tell people like, you may not like, if you don't like those sounds, it may not help. Find sounds you do. Me, I love nature sounds. That's my preference. And so just finding I love music, just finding a handful of options and just keeping them on rotation is great. And then lastly, if you have a spike and it changes in some way, the sound that was helping you before may not be the right sound in that moment. And so often a good strategy during spikes is to go back to the drawing board and try one of the other sounds that you've found, or find a new sound entirely, and you'll get better results.
Absolutely. Try what works for you and then keep doing it.
Exactly.
Okay, great question here. Is it harder to habituate if you've had tinnitus longer, or the longer you've had tinnitus?
That's a great question. Not necessarily, but possibly. There's a lot of factors that can go into how long it takes for somebody to habituate. How long you've had it is not necessarily the biggest one. Really, it's just how deep into the vicious cycle of anxiety and fight flight you've gotten to. I mean, in my opinion, the condition that most closely resembles tinnitus is PTSD. Like the emotional and psychological impacts and nervous system activation looks a lot like post-traumatic stress disorder. And how deep you are into that response will often determine like how long it takes to break the response. And it can happen, you can get there quickly, you can get there over a long period of time. Like there's people, but remember, there's, a large number of people who have tinnitus and have had it there a long time and have no problem. Like they never developed that negative response. So while it can sometimes be a contributing factor, there's no reason to think that it's going to take longer just because you've had tinnitus for longer. On average, I work with people for like 3.5 months, and usually people are starting to notice the improvement in emotional response in the first week or two, once you implement a lot of new tools.
Brilliant. Okay, so we are coming very close to the end. Glenn, it would be awesome. I'm really sorry, guys. I know there's lots of questions left, and I'm really sorry for the people that I haven't got around to asking questions. We do these webinars regularly, so please do come along to the next one and ask your questions at the next one, and we'll be able to get around to them. Glenn, tell us, how can we find out more about the services you offer? Where can we hear about your book, for example, or where can we read your
Absolutely.
book?
So you can find everything about me on my website, rewiringtinnitus.com. You can find information about my coaching program. If anyone, all this stuff I'm talking about sounds good and anyone wants to work with me one-on-one, or even just reach out and ask questions and learn more, you can contact me and find everything I'm doing over at rewiringtinnitus.com. I have my book, Rewiring Tinnitus. It's available on Amazon worldwide. If you're in the US, it's actually free for Amazon Prime members right now. It was accepted into Amazon, made an offer to include it in Prime Reading. So if you're an Amazon Prime member, on the Kindle ebook version is free. I think might just be in the US. I'm not sure if that's everywhere or just in the US, but certainly on Amazon.com. And I also have a variety of audio albums that I sell that feature that brainwave entrainment technology I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, but I have, for example, guided meditations where it has background noise for masking and this brainwave entrainment technology that will kind of sedate you and help you to get into that meditative state, even though it's happening artificially. Like you're still getting there while you're doing the guided meditation, and all kinds of other interesting guided coping tools and audio tracks that I've created. It's called the Tinnitus Relief Project, and you can find that at my website as well.
Brilliant. Glenn, thank you so much for your
pleasure.
time today, this evening. It's been an awesome conversation. So guys, I'm really, really excited to tell you about a new package that we've got that I'm sure resonates with a lot of what Glenn has been talking about this evening, and it's all about getting to habituation. I'm just going to spend 5 minutes taking you through this. Can you see my screen, by the way, Glenn?
Yep, I'm with you.
Great. So I'm really, really excited to tell you guys about the 90-day tinnitus tune-out package that we've just launched, which means that now you guys can take control of your tinnitus. So this includes everything you guys need to tune out tinnitus in 90 days. I'm going to take you through individually how these things work and what's included. We've got a lot of value here, guys. So first, digital CBT program. Those of you that use the app will know that you can use this to learn how to turn tinnitus into a background noise, so you can actually just forget about searching for a cure. You're going to learn how to take charge of your tinnitus and not just accept it like the doctors told you to, and you'll work your way through a 6-week audio program based on the latest scientific research. So this includes loads of evidence-based techniques, so mindfulness, CBT, ACT, physical therapy. Now, what's new about this package is that we're also offering monthly specialist group coaching sessions. So you guys are going to get some really rapid results with the help of our tinnitus specialists. You're going to master Otto's digital program, will guide you through tinnitus habituation with minimal effort from your end. You'll get one 45-minute group session per month, 20 people per group, and it will give you direct access to a tinnitus expert. So all the questions you guys have got now, you'll be able to ask questions on a monthly basis with your own tinnitus specialist. We're going to build you a custom habituation plan. So in order to make sure habituation definitely works for you, whatever type of tinnitus you have, I know we've got lots of people here with different types of tinnitus. You're going to get results if you struggled before, and that's because we're going to build a custom program for you, created by one of our expert team members. We know how much you guys love to hear about other people that have succeeded with tuning out tinnitus, how inspirational it was to hear about Glenn's story. You're going to see firsthand with this package that you can tune out tinnitus. We're going to give you guys priority access to questions in our success story webinars. So each month we have success story webinars. You'll get priority access to ask questions first to the people that the successful people that we interview. So you can learn directly from them. We'll also send you a success story each month, and you'll get access to all the app success stories. Finally, last but not least, you guys are going to get priority access to our team of tinnitus experts, ENTs, doctors, audiologists. Any questions you've got about your tinnitus, you send us a message. We'll be able to get you an answer within a day. All of that, guys, work together is worth a lot. There's a huge amount of value here. We want to package this together for you in a really, really high value and high value offer. So today, I'm really excited to offer this to you for £199 for this 3-month package, which is a 44% discount on the total value of the cost. If you're in the US, that's $249 US, 229 euros, or if you're in Australia, $379. But guys, it doesn't stop there. So if you sign up today, or in the next 24 hours, you will get a free 30-minute call with me, and you can hear about my personal experience with tinnitus, find out what worked for me in my habituation journey. You'll get an opportunity to ask me questions, any questions you like about my journey or tinnitus habituation. And you'll also get unlimited access to the Otto app for as long as you need. So you guys are going to be fully equipped to manage tinnitus spikes. You know, Glenn talked about that long-term plan. This is going to be one of these integral tools that you can use to manage tinnitus going forward, whatever tinnitus throws at you. Guys, we're really, really confident that you're going to find value for this. These are going to be fun. These are going to work for you. So we offer 2 guarantees, a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you don't need to decide yes or no today. All you need to be able to do is make an informed decision on the inside, not the outside. So if you sign up today, get on the inside, find out whether it works for you. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, I'm not happy. You send me an email saying I want a refund, we'll give you a refund. But we also offer a 90-day habituation success money back guarantee. So if after 90 days, you've done the content, you've attended the sessions, you haven't progressed at least one habituation stage, we'll refund you double the purchase cost. So that's double £200, £400. Look, I'm so confident that this is going to work for you guys. That's why we were able to offer these 2 guarantees. So yeah, guys, £199 for 3 months. You're getting a huge amount of value there. We only have 20 slots available to start next week. So because we're offering this new package, we have very limited capacity. We only have 20 slots available. So we're going to offer it on a first come, first served basis. So don't miss out, guys. This is a really good opportunity to start tuning out tinnitus. So there's a question, what if you already pay for the app monthly? So you can cancel your subscription. We can give you a refund for the most recent payment. And this includes the app subscription. Yearly subscription, we could give you a partial discount off the price. So whatever you've paid, we can knock off the price, Fraser. So that's fine. How can you sign up? Well, I'm going to post a link for you guys in the chat. And also I'm going to send an email to you guys after this is finished, so you can sign up through the email. Once you have signed up, we will get things out to you tomorrow to get started with your first specialist coaching session next week. But as I said, we only have 20 slots, guys, available. So don't miss out. It will be first come, first served. So whilst I'm posting the link, there was a question in the chat about how we can contact Glenn directly. Glenn, how can we contact you directly?
Yes. Well, you can. So honestly, I'm happy to give my email out. So just Glenn, GLENN at rewiringtinnitus.com. I'm more than happy to connect with everybody. Please feel free to send me questions. I try to get back to everybody whenever possible. I have the Rewiring Tinnitus Facebook page, and a LinkedIn as well is another avenue that people can get a hold of me. But I love to connect with people. I'm happy to connect with everybody and answer questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out directly. And I hope everyone will grab a copy of my book while it's free.
Thank you, Glenn. Really appreciate you joining us this evening, guys. Do please reach out to Glenn.
My pleasure.
He's
I appreciate the opportunity.
So no problem. So there's just a few questions about the Tune Out Tinnitus package. So the coaching session will include 20 people at the same time. Yes, we found that people really benefit from these group coaching sessions. You can learn from each other. There's some group accountability, so you can hold yourselves to doing the exercises that we recommend. And often people will have the same questions that you have. And it's nice to know that other people are going through the same thing that you're going through. So we found that people really benefit from these group coaching sessions. What time will the sessions be held? It will be at the same time as this, but there will be options. There will be different options for people in different parts of the world. So there will be flexibility with the group coaching sessions. Glenn, we're getting a few people saying they've downloaded the book, which is great.
Awesome.
I'm sure people will find that useful. So guys, if you want to sign up to this Tune Out Tinnitus package, I've put the link in the chat. Please click on that. If you don't get the link in the chat, I'm going to send an email to you all with some more information afterwards. But otherwise, Glenn, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time again, and really looking forward to catching up at some point again in the future.